Oregon getting 2 new transfers this weekend. One, not a surprise. The other, I don't think it was a surprise per se, but Oregon was in the running for him. Payton Woodyard, the transfer, they got him out of Alabama. That's no shocking development. We talked about that last week.
By the way, he's never played it down. He's a freshman, so he signed and committed to Saban before Saban retired, and then he was in this last 2024 recruiting
You're
class.
granted your release if your coach leaves, and so he comes over to Eugene. And the other big one for them was getting Michigan State transfer defensive lineman Derrick Harmon. This was a pretty big blow for Michigan State fan. They were pretty sad to see him go.
Thanks, Jonathan. They lost their 2 best defensive linemen. One went to Miami and one went to Oregon this weekend.
Well, yeah, and Harmon choosing Oregon, again, I don't think any of this is a shock if Oregon ends up getting a guy like this, but they were one of the few teams that he named, and he chose Oregon. So you land a secondary piece, and we'll see if he can help this year, if much at all. And then Harmon will absolutely be in the rotation as a pretty reliant defensive lineman at the front of that defense for Dan Lanning and Taj Lapoy. Your immediate thoughts and feelings of landing both those players?
I mean, it keeps getting better, man. Every time I think that they're done, and this is probably what the roster will look like, they go out and do stuff like this. It's not even mentioning Nasir Wyatt, who committed over the weekend, who is a 2025 recruit, but he's one of the best edge rush recruits in the country out of California. I think I enjoyed the Woodyard one. Was not a surprise. He had been connected to Oregon in his recruiting cycle. Lanning had gone after him very hard. He ended up committing to Saban when you're like, all right, nobody can blame you, dude. Go play for Nick Saban. Saban retires. Nimick told us last week that a part of it was the defense that they're running it now at Alabama doesn't fit him as much as what Nick Saban was running, and so he looked elsewhere, and I'm sure Oregon came with a nice paycheck for him, and Oregon already had a built-in relationship. So Woodyard coming was not the surprise. Derrick Harmon was the surprise. That was the one that it felt like a lot of smoke was leading to him going to Colorado or going to USC. And it made it even sweeter that those were the other 2 teams that were the serious finalists for that guy. Colorado fans are losing their mind at Dan Lanning right now. They had a Spaces on Friday after this happened, or Saturday, whatever day it was. And their fans were just bitching and moaning left and right about what Dan Lanning has done. The viral video last year when they played Colorado, and then you go get this kid after he had already stolen an offensive lineman from Dion earlier in the cycle. And then USC, a team who was trying to take defense seriously for the first time. Lincoln Riley's making that a big onus. It's going to take time to build it and to get there. Guys like this help exponentially for USC, and to steal him away from a team that you're going to have to compete with in the Big Ten. It was massive, dude. Like, they had to replace their 4 in terms of snap count, their 4 most playing defensive linemen from last year's team, interior defensive linemen. And they've now got out and got the Caldwell kid from Houston earlier in the offseason, and now Derrick Harmon, and they have just absolutely reloaded there.
Yeah, Jamari Caldwell. So I saw this from Crepia on Oregon Live. He put out a depth chart post-spring practice, and you just look at the defensive line, and you're like, oof, Jordan Birch, Elijah Rushing, Jamari Caldwell, Amari Washington. You've got Ware Hudson. Now you've got Harmon in the rotation. You've got Mateo. I mean, you just look at the defensive line itself, and then offensive line. Still some questions, I think, for some. I think some of that can get settled as soon as the season gets going. But
I think that's really the only question you have left about the team, to be honest with you. I feel good everywhere else.
It's an important question for sure.
It's massive.
But if it gets answered fairly quickly, every bit of evidence says if you want to win at the highest level in that sport, and Oregon certainly had some success in this run, but if Lanning wants to take that next step up, it's obviously those sides of the ball at those positions. And there is no question on defense to me on the defensive line for sure.
No. I think
secondary, I think, has been pretty shored up.
Yeah.
Linebacker, maybe?
I feel really good about where they're at linebacker.
Okay, so you feel great about their entire defense then.
I do. I think defensively they're going to be an absolute monster this year. And that's really exciting because when you hire a guy like Lanning, I think the whole argument is at some point you want the team to take on his identity. And I think that was the question when he was hired, is how long is that going to take? Year 1, they were not very good defensively. Remember Oregon State, the joke, 19 straight runs. We all remember how that season ended. I thought that was one of the bigger talking points from last season when people say, well, how many big games is Lanning won? What has he actually won? It's like, all right, I mean, he's lost 5 games in 2 years, and 3 of those 5 games were to undefeated teams. you look at where they were defensively in year 1 to where they were defensively in year 2, and now where they will be defensively in year 3, they have taken massive leaps year after year after year. The biggest weakness that they had last year was in their secondary. They were exposed by Washington multiple times. To be fair,
a lot of teams.
To be fair to them, a lot of teams were.
Yeah.
Washington had one of the best passing attacks we've ever seen in the sport. With
Everybody
all those
but
receivers.
Michigan was.
Sure, I mean your team helped. Was helped by the weather when they came to Corvallis a little bit, but even Odunze came up with big plays late. Their secondary, though, was the only kind of weakness you looked at of like, your coverage from the safeties isn't great. You have one corner that you can lean on, but if Kyrie Jackson goes down, who do you have that's reliable after that? And they have attacked that aggressively. They have rebuilt their entire secondary. And it's a sign of an incredibly healthy program when you can lose. When you look at what Oregon's losing from last year's team, Heisman finalist quarterback, best center in the country, best wide receiver in the history of your program, a back-to-back 1,000-yard rusher in Bucky Irving, multiple starting offensive linemen, your the guys who play the most on interior defensive line, Brandon Dorless, Jamal Hill, your 2 starting safeties, your best corner. Like, you go through what they've lost, it is massive, and they're supposed to be even better next year. They have absolutely reloaded. This weekend was another example. I don't know how much Woodyard is actually going to play. We'll see how ready he is. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a small snap count. But they needed help on the defensive line, and Harmon is another big name to add there.
Even if you have some question about the offensive line, it's interesting to go through this depth chart. Junior, 5th year, senior. Now, center is obviously the spot we talk about the most, right? You seem to be very confident about that position, despite losing JPJ because he played in the bowl game. 6-year redshirt senior, 5th year senior. I mean, it's just, even if your question is at the one position, it's an important position, so I don't want to downplay it. Every other spot is absolutely loaded with college football experience.
I don't think it's too far of a stretch to say that this is appearing on paper to be the most talented team in the history of the program.
On paper, I certainly wouldn't argue that point. You've had other teams that other people would throw out the
that actually got to championships, and maybe this team doesn't. I don't know.
Yes.
But I would also argue it's harder now than ever to get to a championship, especially consider the expanded playoffs. So
you think it's the
harder
playoff,
now?
Yeah. I agree and disagree with that. I think to get through the playoff is going to be a challenge because you got to win multiple games to get to the title, whereas, years past, you just had to be ranked at a certain level to get to that point. But my only pushback is I don't know if it's harder because the portal exists and Oregon has got their S together for NIL collective, for portal, for what the program kind of is. So in a weird way, they can bring in better talent year to year.
That's fair.
But also, to your point, getting through a playoff is going to be a challenge because, what if you draw Ohio State round 1 and your second round matchup is LSU? Right? And then, a title game, you got Georgia.
Yeah, good luck. You got to go win 3 straight games against teams that are really difficult. I see your point about building rosters. I made the joke on our YouTube thing we did with Ryan Clark a couple weeks ago. If you allowed Oregon to design the system of college football, if you sat down with everybody in the brass in Eugene and said, design how you want college football to look, this is probably the system that they would come up with. Allow us to go out and pay for players. Oregon now, by the way, with these 2 additions, and the transfer portal is now closed, so you can't enter it anymore. They are over their scholarship number by 3 guys. I want to say you're allowed to have 85 scholarships. I think they have 87 or 88 guys. And everybody's waiting to see if any other dominoes would fall. They have the ability through NIL to basically say, you don't need to be on scholarship. We'll pay you NIL money and we'll pay for your school. So you're essentially on scholarship, but it doesn't count as a scholarship.
Right.
So they have the
ability. What are
ability.
your books? What's your room and board?
It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
So we're covering all of it. So they have the ability to have a couple extra guys, and some of those guys are, probably back-end depth chart young guys that are just sticking around for another year to see where it goes. I don't know how long they'll be on campus, but they have the ability to do that. Watching Oregon last year, and I made this remark a couple of times during the season, Oregon's had good years. They've had fun seasons. They've had successful years, but last year was the first year that you watched them and you truly felt like that's one of the best teams in the country. Now, I don't know where they go, but are they the 3rd best, 5th best, 6th best? I don't know. They're one of the best teams in the country, and you're going to have that same feeling this year. Oregon is one of the best teams in college football, and they have a legitimate chance to win a national championship, and it's incredibly exciting, and it's why I cannot wait for the season to get here.
I don't want to overlook the Civil War non-conference tilt because I think there's just going to be fans of both programs that don't want to lose that game, right? So that's still going to mean something to a lot of people. But if we go through the season schedule, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a potentially bigger game in Autzen history than October 12th when Ohio State comes to town.
It will be the biggest game in the history of Oregon
I
football.
wanted to say that
regular season,
but you've had other years where teams have come here. I just don't think from a talent perspective, from an expectations perspective, you think this could be the most talented Oregon team just on paper. Now they have to go out and prove that. There's a lot of really great Oregon teams that deserve their credit. Just from a paper standpoint, that game to me smells like the biggest game in Oregon football history.
Yeah, taking out postseason games, regular season games.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's close, man. Like Ohio State is loaded; they will be ranked in the top 3. Oregon is loaded; they will be ranked in the top 3.
And Oregon is barely favored in that game, at least right now. It's October 12th when that game's played. It's May, but they are like a 1.5 point favorite in an early open line. That certainly can change as time goes on, but like they're barely a home favorite, which kind of says they're a home dog in a way.
To a certain extent, yeah, because you usually give 3 points to the home team, right? And so if you're telling them they're only a 1 point favorite, that means on a neutral site you think Ohio State's maybe a point or two better than Oregon. The atmosphere that day is going to be incredible. I cannot wait, and it's also embarking a new journey in the Big Ten, in which this is your first showdown game and a chance to make a statement. And it's the two teams that I think everybody looks at in the conference and says, number 1 or number 2. Everybody can put them in different orders they want. I don't think anybody's putting Michigan, Penn State, anybody else in that category. With these two,
not right now.
They're the two best teams in the conference going into the year, and they meet early in the season, which I love because I wouldn't be surprised if we get a rematch in Indianapolis.